in late March, early April, we would order a couple of hundred straight run chickens. They come from Funk's hatchery at DeSoto. It was in years there, in business there for years, and I think went out of business about 1973 or 4. I said before, we didn't get electric in 1948. Chicken was your fresh meat the year round. We didn't sell it. We took care of it on the local table. Hogs were a source of income except for what we consumed ourselves. For a lot of years, and this continued up until I went to Public Works in 1969. We butchered hogs. I can remember as a child growing up, hog killing day was a big day. Dad usually butchered a hog in the end of October whenever weather turned cool enough to what he called cool out, and hang it in a tree at the corner of the yard and overnight, and it would be firm enough to cut up the next morning. Usually our hog killing was Christmas week. Dad usually killed 4 or 5 hogs, and then he killed one in early to mid-March to have one in the spring. Sometimes the weather turned warm and we would have to pickle that. And whenever I say pickle, we made a brine and put in a stone jar and cut the meat up and put in that jar. In the mid-30s, Martin Salt Company came out with a sugar cure that you didn't have to smoke. And they also had a product they called Tender Quick, that you used something like a very big medicine needle that you could go in with around the joints and pump this brine in there, and the meat would keep. You get rid of the blood with that brine, and you would pack your hams and bacon shoulders in the sugar cure and let it set for, I think it was 3 weeks. Then you washed that, and my dad would let it dry good, and I can remember that he wrapped it in brown paper and hung it in canvas sacks in the smokehouse, and that was our meat in the summertime. Dad, and hearing him and my mother talk, he first had the Model T. Then he bought what was known as a Star, S-T-A-R. I saw one in my lifetime, and I only saw the one due rent that we owned. He bought that in 1930, I understand, and he traded it off in 1940 for a Ford Chevrolet. That was our first car that I can remember, and the one I learned to drive on. First 2 years I went to this one-room country school, a gentleman by the name of James Dace, who had a multitude of brothers, lived south of Caledonia on Cedar Creek. He was my teacher. I remember one time he brought his Model A to school, and he come driving down through the woods. The Hazel Glen School was probably half to 3/4 of a mile off the county road, and no road into it. It was kind of set in the middle of the school district, but I can still remember that Model A, him driving down through the woods. It was a dry day, of course, because he would never made it off the gravel road without that, but schools weren't on a public conveyance every time. Washington County, to my knowledge, had about 68 rural schools. Hazelbuck Glen being in the southeast part of the county, neighboring schools that some people might remember was Sloan Schoolhouse over on 21 and M Highway. It's where my father went to school part of the time. Furnace Creek was further towards Potosi. As we come around the Horn, Hostetter School, going towards the east, Rock Springs and Hopewell. You come on around and it was Irondale. There's another one before you got back to Sloan Schoolhouse, and I can't come up with the name of it. Sherlock was another one that was in that. Alvin Caves, that sounds right. So we're on 32 going towards Bismarck, across from where the lake development is. You had to walk to school. Wasn't any other conveyance unless you understand that some people actually rode a horse and tied the horse. Kind of jumping ahead here a few years, but when you talk about riding a horse, my sister, who was 13 and a half years older than I, went to school in Irondale, where I went to high school also. But the first year that she went, and this get Jackson history here, she caught the school bus at Big River and Cedar Creek, at the old Cedar Creek Bridge on M Highway. Lenny drove the bus, and people from Belgrade went to school of Irondale for 2 years. That's where they got their high school education. The next year, she and the neighboring girl walked from our house to Irondale to school. That's the way they had to go when I crossed the swinging bridge down below Irondale, where the old mining development used to be, and walked to school. At one time, the owner of the Forest Milling Company calculated how many hundreds of miles they walked to school a year, but they walked every day during their sophomore year.
Wow.
The third year, junior year, she rode a horse, and a family let her put her horse a little ways from the schoolhouse and the barn during the day, and she rode it home at night. The last year, the Irondale School had a bus and a driver, and she got to ride in style.